After 4 years of conflict, the Civil War ended, and the victorious Union Army quickly disbanded, leaving a small force to handle various duties. These included guarding the eastern seaboard, occupying the South during Reconstruction, and returning to numerous responsibilities in the West. The work in the West was often challenging, especially since after Lee's surrender, the authorized strength of the U.S. Army was reduced to 54,302 officers and men, and the salary of a private was cut by $3 per month, nearly a 20% pay reduction. The situation worsened over time. From the mid-1860s to the late 1890s, the actual total force of the regular army averaged a mere 25,000 men. Among these soldiers were new additions, African Americans, many of whom had been enslaved before joining the ranks. Over time, these soldiers were dubbed Buffalo Soldiers. The same rule that allowed African Americans to enlist in the U.S. Army also allowed up to 1,000 Native Americans to become scouts. Alongside black and white soldiers were Apaches, Cheyennes, Yavapais, Pimas, Crows, Arikaras, and other tribal members. Many of the white soldiers came from Europe, particularly the British Isles and present-day Germany. Regardless of their origins, everyone faced challenges due to manpower shortages and limited funds. This situation was further complicated by a divided command structure. While the commanding general in Washington, D.C. was supposed to oversee the dispersed forces, policy conflicts with the Secretary of War, and the fact that the Army staff reported directly to the Secretary rather than the commanding general caused internal friction. This severely hampered efforts to pacify the Native American tribes. Geography added to the challenges. The post-war Army, like the pre-war Army, was divided into regional departments, each with a commander responsible for operations in their area. Since Native American tribes often moved across regional boundaries, this led to friction when troops from one command pursued them into another region. Another issue was the disparity in ranks. Envy arose from the fact that many of the post-war Army's commanders had held higher positions during the conflict and from the honorary or brevet ranks granted for distinguished service. Officers often resented that someone who had been their subordinate during the war now held a higher rank. Despite the internal conflicts in the years following the Civil War, the Army's focus on the Central and Northern Plains kept various commanders and commands extremely busy. U.S. Army infantrymen and their comrades from other branches were stationed from Mexico to the Canadian border, with the West producing the majority of the workforce as they patrolled a vast region that included more than half of the continental United States. This immense area included critical overland routes that needed protection. Trails such as the Smoky Hill in Kansas, the Bozeman from Fort Laramie to Montana's Goldfields, and the Gila Trail across the Southwest from Texas to California required military escorts and patrols. Furthermore, the building of railroads such as the Santa Fe and the Union Pacific Central Pacific required the presence of soldiers for defense. Native tribes, seeing these iron horses as threats to their already dwindling game supply, occasionally attacked the encroaching railroads. They also targeted telegraph wires, prompting patrols to guard crews building or repairing these vital communication lines. To safeguard these lines of communication and transportation, troops, particularly infantrymen, were stationed at strategic locations. This positioning was intended to enable rapid response to any threats. Additionally, the presence of these military posts encouraged settlement by offering protection and creating economic opportunities for supplying goods to soldiers and their families. However, the majority of the year was spent by Uncle Sam's frontline soldiers stationed in garrisons, frequently in isolated outposts distant from larger towns. For these frontier troops and the women who shared their hardships, garrison duty could be monotonous, primitive, and isolating. Women were classified under regulations as camp followers, regardless of their status, from the colonel's wife to the common camp woman. Despite this, they bore children, managed households in substandard government quarters, and took on numerous thankless tasks. Many women were more than passive observers. They actively contributed and left behind powerful memoirs detailing the challenging yet resilient lives they led. Desertion and drunkenness were major issues for the military. Diversions and activities provided occasional breaks from the monotonous routine of drills, construction duties, and daily tasks. Troops sometimes intervened to maintain law and order or assist victims of natural disasters. In addition to their military duties, they built the fort's structures, supplied firewood, cleaned equipment, and even grew their own food to supplement the bland government rations. Like the government-issued food, life at the garrison was uniform and unvaried. Daily routines were consistent, creating a structured community where each post was similar, with differences only in local building materials. The parade ground typically served as the focal point of the installation, akin to a village green. Here stood the flagpole with the American flag flying overhead, symbolizing government authority. It was also where the soldiers gathered to perform their duties, including guard mounts, reviews, and other ceremonies. Initially, military drills were based on techniques developed before the Civil War, but a new infantry manual soon replaced these older methods. Written by Emory Upton, a courageous brevet major general from the Civil War, his infantry tactics was completed during 1866-67 while he was stationed at West Point. Infantry training rapidly adopted this guidebook as the norm. Upton's subsequent volumes for cavalry and artillery, published in 1874 and 1875 respectively, established a comprehensive framework for Army tactics. Along with the new manual came advancements in weaponry. Although soldiers immediately after Lee's surrender were still equipped with muzzle-loading rifles from the Civil War, there was a push to replace them with breech-loading firearms. Soldiers were issued converted muskets, originally from the Civil War era, modified with a sleeve in the barrel to change cartridges from .58 caliber to .50 caliber, and fitted with new flip-up blocks for breech loading. These improved firearms increased the rate of fire and were well received by troops when facing enemies accustomed to the slower-loading muskets of the past. In 1867, infantrymen stationed in present-day Wyoming demonstrated the superiority of these breech loaders. While on a woodcutting detail for the newly established Fort Phil Kearny, a group of infantrymen and civilian contractors faced a heavy attack by a superior force of Lakotas, numbering around 1,000 warriors against roughly 40 whites. Not very long ago, 80 men from the same station, under the command of 18th U.S. Infantry Captain William Fetterman, had been massacred. It seems that the past was about to happen again. Fortunately, the besieged detail took refuge behind the wagon beds, removed from their running gears to transport felled trees. Using the wagon boxes as makeshift fortifications, which gave the engagement its name, the determined defenders repelled wave after wave of mounted Indians. Their good marksmanship, resilience, and the new breech loaders enabled them to hold their ground and avoid the fate of Fetterman's men. Contrary to the Hollywood cliché, attacks near military posts were rare. More often, infantrymen and their mounted cavalry comrades embarked on spring or summer campaigns that took them far from their barracks. These field operations often led to considerable human suffering and significant expense to the national treasury. Despite these costs, the results were frequently unimpressive. For every noteworthy clash that made headlines in the Eastern and European press, hundreds of other encounters went unnoticed or were quickly forgotten. The soldiers' views of the Indians they pursued as part of government policies reveal a lack of understanding that contributed to the conflict between the two groups. In the end, the Army was as much a victim as the Indians in the tragic period between the mid-1860s and early 1890s, enduring a thankless existence of boredom occasionally interrupted by the adventure of campaigning.